Hello everyone, it's Jefford again from Rubik's Academy. Alright, thank you for tuning in again. It's another video. So today we are talking about the major players in the capital markets, in the stock markets to be exact, right? Capital can refer to a lot of other different instruments like bonds, like property investments, like your precious metals, commodities. So for the context of this beginner's edition, we are just focusing on the capital markets, the equity markets, not the debt markets. Okay, so it's just the equity markets. Okay, then for the equity markets, for the stock markets, there are multiple major players which we are going to look at today. We're going to look a bit in depth on them today so that you understand the overall environment of what's happening in the equity markets. Okay, now let me just go to my... Now, if you do not know by now, this is a beginner's edition of the stocks market knowledge course, right? If you are not a beginner, if you're a veteran, if you're someone who is seasoned, you shouldn't be watching this video. Okay, this is purely for newbies and for beginners. Okay, so now for the stock markets, for the equity markets, right? Sometimes we call it the stock markets. Right, sometimes we call it the equity markets or the equities markets, right? But in any case, it means the exact same thing. They are synonyms of each other. Okay, now so for the stock markets, there are multiple major players, right? Number one, you have the speculators, right? And within the speculators, okay, it comprises of the mom and pop investors. Okay, or sometimes we refer to them as the retail crowd. These are all the terminologies that are used in the scene, in the industry. Okay, mom and pop basically refers to your uncle, auntie, you know, your typical dad, your typical stay-home mom, you know, people who don't have a lot of capital to trade with. Maybe they upwards of 5k to about 100,000 at most. Okay, these are your retail crowd. These are your speculators. All right, and these are the people that are most vulnerable to the ebbs and flows of the stock market because they have such a small account size. That's number one. Number two is because they usually follow the crowd. They are subjected to this thing called the herd mentality. Herd mentality. So the herd mentality is very simple. I think you guys already know what it means just from the word itself, but just in case you don't know, herd mentality basically means or refers to the situation whereby you follow the crowd. Just because he invested, you're gonna invest. Just because she invested, you're going to invest. So the mom and pop investors are very subjected to this thing called the herd mentality, which is bad, right? Because when you follow the herd, you usually suffer with the herd. All right, and as we go on in the lessons for this particular beginners series, you will learn more about why having herd mentality is the worst. Okay, now that's the first group, your retail, your mom and pop investors, your speculators. The second group are your corporations, right? That means these are your companies, your privately owned companies, companies who have maybe set aside some funds to invest into the capital or the debt markets, you know, the financial markets to be more general. Okay, and these are big businesses. Okay, if they are small medium enterprises, if they are small enterprises, then they still belong under the speculator bracket. Okay, only when you have at least your valuation of the company is at least 10 million and above, you can be considered a corporation level participant in the capital markets. Okay, so these are your companies. Then you have your private banks. Okay, your private banks. That means banks that are not owned by the government, banks that are not related to the government. And of course, private banks, they have an investment arm, like an investment banking arm, and they have a retail banking arm. Okay, The difference between investment banking and retail banking is the fact that for retail banking, that's where your mom and pop investors will go there to open an account, deposit money inside the account, withdraw cash out of the account. Your ATMs will be there. You can buy certain insurance policies. You can buy maybe unit trust. You can tap into mutual funds. Basically, it caters to the individual, all right, small time individuals, okay, for their account opening needs. The investment arm of the bank usually caters to corporations, people who have deeper pockets, people who want to open a broker account with the bank itself to trade the capital markets. So these are the two branches of a private bank. Now the last participant is your public bank. Okay, your public bank is your fourth and largest participant. So these are banks that have direct relations to the government, or they are owned by the government. Okay, so usually we also call them central banks. Alright, we also call them central banks. That means banks that are directly controlled by the government, and these are national banks. Okay, central banks, national banks, or sometimes they are known as monetary authorities, or sometimes they are known as monetary agency. Alright, so these are the four names that they go by usually. Alright, these are your national banks, your central bank. That means the bank which falls under the purview of the government. Now the public banks are the biggest participant because they have the power to control this thing called the monetary policy. Okay, they sometimes certain national banks can also control this thing called a fiscal policy. Alright, we'll learn more about what these two types of policies are as we go on in the beginners series, but just know that out of these four participants, the public bank participant is the strongest, is the biggest. Okay, followed by the private banks, followed by the corporations, and then the speculators. Right, there's another word that you will see very commonly in the investment scene in the financial industry, and that word is this word called institutions. Okay, whenever they use the word institutions, all right, it can either refer to corporations, private banks, or public banks. Okay, it can refer to one of these three things. All right, or sometimes it can refer to a fund management firm, FMC, a fund management company or fund management firm. That means companies that specializes in managing people's money. So they will set up a fund to manage people's money, and they will say that within this fund, FUND,